Welcome back, everyone, to the Wedge 52 Gridiron podcast. I'm your host, Wedge. Today's episode, I'll be ranking my top 5 wide receivers in the NFL. But before we jump into that, please make sure you press that follow button right here on Spotify. That way you can stay up to date and be notified of all my other episodes that are dropping. For example, my last episode, I dropped my top 5 running backs in the NFL. And next Tuesday, I will be dropping my top 5 quarterbacks in the NFL, as well as a week 1 preview next Wednesday. So go ahead, press that follow button right here on Spotify. Rate the podcast if you'd like. And if you're really inclined, go check out my Instagram at Wedge52Gridiron. With that being said, let's jump in to today's episode, my top 5 wide receivers in the NFL. So kind of what I'm looking at here is going to be last year's stats, as well as the last 3 years' stats. Those two things, as well as last year's single game highs for the major categories. And then kind of as well as the eye test, how fun they are to watch, how many big time plays they're making, contested catches, things like that. As well as taking into account the team's other weapons, whether that be other receivers, tight ends, how good their quarterback is, that kind of thing, all kind of weighs in. So for me, the 3-year stretch is, kind of a good indicator of who is really top 5 in the league, regardless of position. Because, yes, there's players that have had a great season, like for last year, let's say. But to truly be great and be one of the top 5 in the league, I believe, you have to continuously be able to do that. So that's why the 3-year stretch is important to me, so that you guys know. Before I jump into the list, there is 3 wide receivers who are entering their 3rd year, who are already, making an approach to the top 5, but none of them made the cut. But those 3 players to watch, at least for this season, to potentially sneak into the top 5 for next season, would be Jamar Chase, Jalen Waddle, and even Amon-Ra St. Brown. So with that being said, let's jump into my top 5 wide receivers, starting with the 5th best wide receiver in the NFL. And that is who I have Cooper Kupp as the 5th best wide receiver in the NFL. Cooper Kupp plays for the Los Angeles Rams. Last season, Cooper Kupp experienced an injury just about halfway through the season. That kept him out for the year. He should hopefully be back towards the early part of the season this year for the Rams. But last year, Cooper Kupp had 75 receptions, 812 yards, and 6 touchdowns in the games that he played. So, pretty decent numbers, not great, obviously. But those are solid, like wide receiver 2 type numbers. And Cooper Kupp did that in about half a season. So definitely was on pace for much more. Over the past 3 seasons, Cooper Kupp has had 312 receptions, 3,733 yards, and 25 touchdowns, to go along with an Offensive Player of the Year and a first-team All-Pro. Both of those recognitions came last season in 2021, or 2 years ago, last full season that he played. In 2021, where Cooper Kupp had the receiving triple crown, leading the league in receptions, receiving yards, and touchdowns. Last year, the single game highs for Cooper Kupp were 14 receptions, 128 yards, and 2 touchdowns. So great numbers for him. It definitely, if he stayed healthy, we would have seen, those numbers being even higher. His 75, 8, 12, and 6 touchdowns. So Cooper Kupp comes in at number 5, and he did that playing only 41 games the past 3 years. Like I said, missing a good chunk last season. I do think it'll be very interesting if he's able to stay in the top 5 and kind of just, seeing, how well he can return to form, not only in himself, but the Rams now having less weaponry, outside of Cooper Kupp than they did the past couple of seasons, as well as, Stafford returning from injury. That team and that offense may, live or die on Cooper Kupp, which makes it easier for the defense to defend. So it's going to be interesting to see if Cooper Kupp holds his position within the top 5 after the 2023 season. And one of my honorable mentions, I was, going back and forth very heavily between Cooper Kupp and one of my honorable mentions, which I will disclose in 1 second here. But ultimately, I gave it to Cooper Kupp. You can't, for me at least, it's hard to forget the fact that Cooper Kupp had the Triple Crown in 2021, which is not, that's not a common thing for a wide receiver to do. Having the highest amount of, receptions, yards, and touchdowns in one season. So that is what gave him the slight edge. So my two, before we, continue down my list of top 5 wide receivers in the NFL, I'll give my 2 honorable mentions. These 2 guys just missed the cut. The one that I was debating very heavily with Cooper Kupp and the 5th position is Philadelphia Eagles wide receiver A.J. Brown, who throughout the last 3 years, A.J. Brown has had 221 catches for 3,440 yards and 27 touchdowns to go along with a second-team All-Pro. And my other honorable mention for the top 5 wide receivers is going to be Dallas Cowboys wide receiver CeeDee Lamb. So he just missed the cut as well with 260 catches for 3,396 yards and 20 touchdowns, as well as a second-team All-Pro for Mr. Lamb. CeeDee Lamb, is entering his 4th season now, and it's going to be very interesting. I have high hopes for CeeDee Lamb. He has improved his receptions, yards, and touchdowns each of the last 3 years. If he does that again in this 2023 season, do not be surprised to see him cracking the top 5 next year for the 2024 season. So let's move on to the 4th best wide receiver in the NFL, in my opinion, is Buffalo Bills wide receiver Stefon Diggs. Last year, Stefon Diggs caught 108 passes for 1,429 yards and 11 touchdowns. Those numbers were good enough to get Diggs onto the second-team All-Pro last season. Stefon Diggs over the last 3 years has had 338 receptions for 4,189 yards and 29 touchdowns. And then he has that second-team All-Pro as well as a first-team All-Pro within the last 3 years. Stefon Diggs, has been the, go-to guy for the Buffalo Bills and Josh Allen. Gabe Davis obviously always has his couple games a year where he goes absolutely crazy. But, for the most part, Diggs has been their guy. They don't really have a dominant receiving threat. They're hoping to kind of change that and kind of take some pressure off of Diggs this season with their draft picks, Dalton Kincaid. But Stefon Diggs is drawing the attention of the defense and still continuing to produce. Last year, Stefon Diggs' career highs, or game highs, were 12 receptions, 148 yards, and 3 touchdowns. He's the only player within my top 5 for the 2023 season, or for the 2022 season stats who had, 3+ touchdowns in a game. He's only one of the top 5 who's done that here on my list. Stefon Diggs, obviously a stud of a receiver, continues to make big play after big play. This is not anywhere within the 3-year range, but it obviously has the famous Minneapolis Miracle play when he was a member of the Vikings. And Stefon Diggs continues to, be that guy. Stefon Diggs makes very good contested catches. His routes are very crisp. And that is why Stefon Diggs is the 4th best wide receiver in the NFL. Moving on to that number 3 spot. This is where it starts to get into the nitty-gritty of the list. It starts to get really difficult in terms of ranking these next 3 guys. So let me give you guys my take on it. Coming in at the 3rd spot is Miami Dolphins wide receiver Tyreek Hill. Last year, Tyreek Hill had 119 receptions for 1,710 yards to go along with 7 touchdowns and first-team All-Pro honors. Tyreek Hill did this in his first year as a member of the Dolphins. Previously, he spent time in the Kansas City uniform for the Chiefs. So that's where, 2 out of the 3 years of his 3-year run come with that. There was a lot of discussion when Tyreek Hill got traded that, Tyreek, going both ways for Tyreek and for Mahomes. But we're talking about Tyreek Hill in this case. There's a lot of discussion about, Tyreek Hill's not going to be elite anymore because he doesn't have Mahomes throwing him the ball. Tua's not the same. Tyreek Hill, he only got yards and touchdowns because of his speed, and Mahomes has the strongest arm. So that's where, he's just throwing it up to Tyreek. Tyreek Hill proved everybody wrong. He still had 1,700 yards last season, which is absolutely ridiculous. That put him second in the league for yards last year, as well as 119 catches. That is a crazy amount. That is, also he was second in receptions and yards last year on a first year on a new team. And he did that on a team that had another very good wide receiver in Jalen Waddle, who I mentioned, is entering his 3rd season now and is a player to watch, to compete for a top 5 wide receiver position on my list here. So, good on Tyreek Hill. It definitely shows how good he actually, is. And yes, it is because of his speed, but how he uses that speed and how sharp his routes are and his ability to get open. And then maybe Tua doesn't have the strongest arm like Mahomes did, but if Tyreek Hill's open, Tua can get him the ball. And then it's about what Tyreek Hill can do after the catch as well. So the last 3 years for Tyreek Hill, like I mentioned, it's going to be the Dolphins year as well as 2 Chiefs years before then. He has 317 receptions for 4,225 yards and 31 touchdowns to go for 2 first-team All-Pro selections. Last year, Tyreek Hill's single game highs were 12 receptions, 190 yards, and 2 touchdowns. And Tyreek Hill has played in 48 games over the last 3 years. Stefon Diggs also played in 48 games. I think I forgot to mention that. So they've played in the same amount of games over the past 3 years. Diggs has a couple more catches, a little bit less yards, a little bit less touchdowns. But to be honest, Diggs is a great player. But Tyreek Hill just has more highlight reels than Diggs does. Not saying Diggs doesn't have highlight reels. He most certainly does. But Tyreek Hill is the number 3 wide receiver in the NFL. Now moving on to the second best wide receiver in the NFL, which is going to be Las Vegas Raiders wide receiver Davante Adams. Davante Adams is absolutely ridiculous. No matter if he's in Green Bay, where he spent most of his career, or whether it be in Las Vegas last season, which was his first year as a Raider, and he, as well as, as what Tyreek Hill did, Davante Adams moved to a new team and still put up dominating numbers at the wide receiver position. Last year, Davante Adams had 100 catches for 1,516 yards and 14 touchdowns. Those 14 touchdowns led the league, as well as Davante Adams was first team All-Pro as a Raider last season. And then over the past 3 years, so of course taking into account that one Raider season last year in 2022, as well as his two before that in Green Bay, he has 338 catches for 4,443 yards and 43 touchdowns to go along with 3 first-team All-Pro selections the past 3 years. Davante Adams is an absolute stud. He made a very, very good case to be the number one wide receiver in the league. He's absolutely a touchdown machine with 43 of them. That moves him, 43 touchdowns over the last 3 seasons is, that's 10 more than any of the wide receivers that I studied for this episode. And the person in second, Mike Evans with 33, did not make the list. So that just kind of goes to show how crazy Davante Adams has been going. 4,400 plus yards and 43 touchdowns, 3 first-team All-Pros. When I tell you, it's very close second place for Davante Adams. I mean it. This was a difficult list to make, but I definitely stand on my decision. Davante Adams has some incredible plays, potentially some of the strongest hands in the NFL in terms of contested balls, balls where he catches, where he's got defenders on his hands, on his arms, things like that. So Davante Adams, definitely a fun player to watch. Number one wide receiver in the NFL is none other than the Minnesota Vikings superstar, Justin Jefferson. Justin Jefferson last year alone put up some incredible numbers, but it was not a one-year thing for him. He has been doing this, pretty much since he entered the league. The past 3 years, Justin Jefferson has been incredible. But let's start with last season. Last season, Justin Jefferson had 128 receptions, which led the NFL, as well as 1,809 yards, which also led the NFL. And then he had 8 touchdowns to go along with those. All of those numbers, accounted for him being first team All-Pro last year, as well as being the 2022 Offensive Player of the Year out of the entire league. So Justin Jefferson, definitely incredible athlete. The catches that he makes, contested balls, I'm sure many of you, if not all of you, have seen the catch that he made against the Buffalo Bills. That is just one of the many crazy catches that he's known to make. As well as he's just fun to watch. He's got very good, moves, juke moves after he's got the ball. As well as, it's always exciting when he gets into the end zone to see him hit the gritty and to see, how the crowd and the fans and how all of them react to that. And then kind of the gritty taking over the league a little bit last year as the celebration of choice or of, repetition, everyone's trying to show their gritty because of Justin Jefferson and him doing the gritty, making it popular, things like that. That is, outside of the football field, obviously. But it is fun to see. It definitely is good on the eye test Justin Jefferson's abilities, his moves, things like that. Over the last 3 seasons, he's had 324 receptions for 4,825 yards and 25 touchdowns. And then he also has that Offensive Player of the Year and First Team All-Pro last year, as well as Second Team All-Pro twice in the 2 seasons before last year's 2022 year. Last year's single game highs for Justin Jefferson are 12 receptions, 223 yards, and 2 touchdowns. As well, the past 3 years, Justin Jefferson has played in 50 NFL games. That is the most out of anyone on the top 5. Justin Jefferson has played in 50. Second place, Davante Adams played in 47. Third place and fourth place, Tyreek Hill and Stephon Diggs both played in 48. And fifth place, Cooper Kupp has played in 41 games. So there you guys have it. My top 5 wide receivers in the NFL: Justin Jefferson, Davante Adams, Tyreek Hill, Stephon Diggs, and Cooper Kupp. That's all I have for this episode. Please press that follow button. Thank you all very much if you have listened all the way through the episode and have made it to this point. Press that follow button, rate the podcast. Stay tuned for next week will be my top 5 quarterbacks. There may be some room for argument within that list. So make sure you guys tune in for that. Thanks you all again, and go Ravens.